When world-renowned pianist Alexander Pierce invited the unassuming black woman Sophia Bennett onto the stage as part of some cruel prank, he was certain it would be her moment of utter humiliation. But what happened next left every soul in that opulent concert hall utterly speechless. Sometimes the most extraordinary talents lie hidden behind the most ordinary faces, and all it takes is one moment to change everything forever. Alexander Pierce, New York's most celebrated white concert pianist, was the living embodiment of musical genius. Hailed by the press as a paragon of artistic excellence, he carried himself with unshakable confidence, silver-trimmed hair cut to perfection, a steely gaze radiating pride. He basked in the lavish praise and adulation of high society as if it were his birthright. Yet, amid all that splendor, no one noticed the small figure quietly working in the shadows behind the stage. A black woman named Sophia Bennett was meticulously polishing the grand piano, her touch so gentle it seemed she feared even the slightest misstep might mar its flawless beauty. Sophia loved that instrument and the wondrous music it could create, but she knew all too well her place in this glamorous world. To everyone gathered here, she was invisible, scarcely worth a second glance. A soft chime rang out, signaling the concert's start. The audience settled into their seats, eyes fixed on the brilliantly lit stage. Alexander Pierce ascended the podium, each step met with thunderous applause that echoed through the lavish hall. Everything was set for a performance of a lifetime. Yet neither Pierce nor the hundreds of distinguished guests could have imagined what was about to unfold, an event that would forever transform the lives of everyone present in that grand concert hall. While the audience was still lost in the thunderous applause welcoming Alexander Pierce, in a dim corner far behind the stage, where the glow of spotlights and admiring gazes could never reach, Sophia Bennett remained quietly at work, gently wiping away every speck of dust from the glossy black grand piano with a soft cloth. She moved with exceptional care, as if that instrument were the only priceless treasure she was ever allowed to touch in this glittering world. Sophia was a black woman in her early 30s, petite in frame, with a gentle face and eyes that held a profound sadness few ever paused to notice. She did not possess the lavish beauty of the ladies seated in the concert hall. Instead, she radiated simple, unassuming grace, her dark curls loosely tied at the nape of her neck. Her worn, cream sweater and faded gray skirt spoke plainly of her circumstances and place in society. Any glance that fell upon her was fleeting, just long enough to confirm one undeniable fact: she did not belong here. From childhood, Sophia had poured her heart into music. Her late father, an amateur pianist, used to play Chopin's soul-stirring nocturnes each evening after a hard day's work in a humble Brooklyn auto shop. Their cramped little apartment could never contain the soaring dreams his melodies inspired. But those nightly tunes were her sole refuge, the only beautiful world she knew. When he passed away, those songs became her most treasured and most painful inheritance. Her dream of becoming a concert pianist was swiftly crushed by life's harsh realities. With no money and no opportunity, she took whatever job she could to afford rent on a tiny Harlem apartment. Landing this cleaning position at Carnegie Hall felt like a stroke of luck, even though she knew she would never truly belong to the world of high art she admired from afar. Every morning, Sophia arrived long before dawn, when Carnegie Hall lay silent. In those quiet moments, she allowed herself to lightly trace her calloused fingers across the piano keys, just enough to taste a fraction of the dream she once held. The notes she coaxed out were barely audible, as though she feared waking the harsh truth that she was only a caretaker, nothing more. Before staff arrived, she would slip away, resume her cleaning duties, and prepare the stage for the celebrated artists she would never join. But today, as she finished her final polish of the keys, a cold voice cut through the stillness, jolting her back to reality. Be careful with that. Do you even know how much this piano is worth? Startled, Sophia spun around, her heart pounding as she realized Alexander Pierce stood just behind her, his eyes cold and filled with suspicion. Pierce's icy blue gaze swept over her with disdain and irritation. To him, the sight of a black woman polishing the instrument he was about to perform on was utterly unacceptable. "I'm sorry, sir," Sophia whispered, lowering her gaze to the floor to avoid his harsh glare. "I only wanted to make sure everything was perfect." "Perfect?" Alexander sneered, folding his arms. "Do you even know what perfection is? People like you shouldn't be allowed near the instruments of true connoisseurs. Now, step aside and do your job." Words failed Sophia as she absorbed his cutting insult. She was used to being invisible, used to scorn. But this affront struck deeper, wounding her dreams and the memory of her father more than anything else. She bowed her head gently and stepped back, yielding the piano to Pierce, who immediately began inspecting it as though her touch had tainted its purity. In that moment, Sophia felt smaller than ever. She slipped behind the curtain, back into her unseen world, her heart aching with the realization that to this society she was nothing more than a diminutive black woman, unworthy of sharing in an artistic dream. Yet deep within that pain, a tiny spark flickered to life. A resolve she had not fully recognized in herself until now. On the illuminated stage, Alexander Pierce launched into his next piece amid fresh rounds of applause. Behind the scenes, Sophia stood hidden, tears glistening in her eyes but burning with determination. One day, she vowed, the world would see how grievously wrong they were to underestimate her. One day, perhaps today, perhaps tomorrow, she would step out of the shadows and seize the dream that was rightfully hers. From behind the deep crimson velvet curtain, the rich, resonant notes from the grand piano at Carnegie Hall began to fill the hall, wrapping the audience in a hushed reverence. But Sophia's heart would not be soothed. The cold words Alexander had just spoken felt like blades plunging into her pride. Alexander Pierce, lauded far and wide as a musical genius, still carried a simmering irritation as he sat before the instrument. His perfectly tailored suit hugged his tall, authoritative frame. His chiseled features bore the familiar arrogance. As his fingers touched the keys, he should have been wholly absorbed in the music, but he could not stop thinking about the black woman whose calloused hands had just brushed against his precious piano. He couldn't fathom how someone beneath him, a mere servant, dared to lay a single finger on the instrument that, to him, symbolized social standing, elite taste, and everything of value he possessed. To let her touch something so sacred was, in his eyes, nothing short of an unpardonable offense. Alexander prided himself on having earned everything through talent and hard work. Yet, deep down, he harbored the conviction that people like Sophia, those from the lowest rungs of society, especially black people, were utterly unworthy and incapable of understanding the art he pursued. To him, she was little more than dirt that needed wiping away each morning. His prejudice ran so deep that he believed everyone should know their place. People like Sophia, black, working class, should accept their lot and never dare to aspire to things beyond them. Her admiration for the piano only infuriated him further, as though it challenged the lofty beliefs he held as gospel truth. Midway through the first piece, Alexander glanced sharply toward the wings and spotted Sophia still standing there, silent, his brow furrowed, a flicker of agitation rippling through his hand poised above the keys. Her presence felt like an insult, as if his sublime music were being sullied by someone so undeserving. That thought stoked his desire to teach her a lesson, one that would firmly remind her of the invisible yet unmistakable boundary she must never cross. In Alexander's mind, music was never meant for everyone. It belonged only to those of true ability and station. People like Sophia would be wise to stay in their place and keep their hands off what they could never truly appreciate. Meanwhile, Sophia stood motionless, battling the tears threatening to spill. Pierce's mocking words, "This piano is worth more than your entire life," echoed in her mind. Her heart ached, not just from the insult, but from the cruel prejudice weighing down her very existence. Yet, within that pain, something quietly began to grow. A silent defiance, a resolve fueled by the desire to prove to this narrow-minded world how wrong they were. As the music soared and the audience erupted into applause, Alexander basked in his triumph, unaware that his arrogance and contempt had kindled within Sophia an unquenchable fire, one that would soon blaze forth with a force neither of them could have imagined, changing their lives forever. The piano's voice continued to soar, cutting through the thick haze of applause and admiring gazes, each Chopin phrase pouring directly into the hearts of those listening, guiding them through its subtle emotional depths. Alexander's long, pale fingers glided effortlessly and gracefully over the keys, as though the music flowed from him without a hint of effort. This was the pinnacle of artistry that his elite audience craved. They were utterly absorbed in the flawless technique and masterful performance unfolding before them. In that moment, Sophia remained standing in the dimly lit rear corner of the hall, her heart torn between the sting of her humiliation and the exquisite beauty of the music filling the room. She barely noticed the prejudice or pain anymore. Her eyes were fixed on every elegant movement Alexander made. Unconsciously, she lifted her own calloused hands, as if she were playing the beloved piece her father once cherished. Amid the mesmerizing melody, Alexander glanced again toward the back of the auditorium. He froze for an instant when he spotted Sophia, utterly transfixed, her hands moving in rhythm with each note and emotion he poured out. Rather than feeling empathy, he felt a growing irritation. To him, this was a brazen challenge, a silent claim that this lowly woman somehow understood an art meant only for the elite. He forced himself to refocus on his music, but the image of Sophia's enraptured gaze and harmonized hands haunted him. He could not bear the notion that someone like her might grasp even a hint of the noble music he performed. This wasn't merely an offense to his pride. It was a stark reminder of the prejudice he masked behind his polished exterior, that people like Sophia should remain silent and in their proper place. When the final notes faded, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. The audience leapt to their feet, showering the pianist with praise for a perfect performance. Alexander stood and bowed with a polite tilt of his head, a smug smile betraying how deeply he relished the acclaim he believed he so rightly deserved. Yet, as the stage lights illuminated his confident face, his gaze flicked once more toward the shadowy corner where Sophia stood. His satisfaction evaporated, replaced by intense frustration. Her genuine passion seemed to mock his authority and standing. He could not endure the thought that, if only for a fleeting moment, she had truly understood his music. Alexander curled his lip in a cold grin, vowing that he would never allow that lowly black woman to overstep her bounds again. Right here, on this night of all nights, he would teach her a lesson about knowing her place, one she would never forget. When the final rounds of applause at last died away, Alexander let a self-satisfied smile spread across his face as he rose lightly from the bench. But instead of bowing as he normally would, he abruptly fixed a malicious gaze on the far corner of the hall where Sophia stood, huddled in shadow. In that instant, the formal atmosphere shifted to one of curious tension. Everyone sensed that Alexander had something unusual in mind. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing clearly through the hall, his sinister grin unbroken. "Tonight, we are honored to have a very special audience member who has been watching so closely." He swept out a gentlemanly yet icy hand toward Sophia, who shrank back against the darkness. Hundreds of eyes turned to her at once, brimming with curiosity and barely concealed mockery. "Why don't you come up here and try a piece?" Alexander continued, each word dripping like a sharpened blade coated in honey. "Who knows? You might be better at this than you are at dusting." A ripple of sneering laughter rushed through the audience like wildfire, igniting a deep humiliation in Sophia's chest. Her cheeks burned. Her labor-hardened hands trembled as she clenched the polishing cloth, her heart pounding so fiercely she thought it might burst. She could hardly believe Alexander would openly shame her before the city's most elegant and powerful people. Standing center stage under the bright lights, Alexander savored the confusion and embarrassment etched on Sophia's face. He felt glee and vindication, as if this was the perfect payback for what he'd perceived as her arrogance when she'd watched him so intently during the performance. To him, she needed a lesson about her proper place in the world, lowly, confined to the shadows. Some in the audience, at first chuckling along, gradually sensed the cruelty behind his words. A few exchanged uneasy glances, but most remained intrigued, eager to see what would happen next. After all, they had little concern for the feelings of an anonymous servant, especially a black woman whose name they didn't even know. In that heavy, tense moment, Sophia longed to flee, to run as far away as she could from those mocking stares and whispered jeers. Yet her legs felt glued to the floor by the weight of her hurt and rising anger. She could not endure this injustice and cruelty for another second. Alexander continued to challenge her with his gaze, as though watching a play unfold. He expected her to shrink back, to slink away in shame, return to her station, and never dare disturb or provoke him again. But amid the derisive laughter and curious stares, a fierce anger kindled within Sophia, an emotion she'd never known she possessed. She remembered her late father's words, that a person's dignity never depends on skin color or social rank, but on the courage to stand against injustice. Right then, Sophia lifted her head. Her eyes shifted from fear to resolute determination. She stared back at Alexander, no longer with meek submission. And for the first time that night the smile on his lips faltered. He sensed something altogether unexpected, a silent challenge, a fire in the eyes of this small black woman he'd never seen before. In that moment, the entire auditorium fell into uneasy silence, as everyone felt that this prestigious concert was about to take a turn none of them could have anticipated. In the unusual hush that had fallen over the hall, Sophia almost felt like giving up, turning on her heel and fleeing at once to escape those scrutinizing, mocking eyes. But just as the urge to surrender flickered in her mind, her father's warm, firm voice echoed in her memory like a gentle but stern reminder. Never let anyone else decide your worth. His words, spoken every time she'd faltered in life, suddenly rang clearer than ever, lending her a surge of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Sophia's trembling hand loosened its grip on the polishing cloth. Her heart pounded fiercely, but this time it was powered not by fear or shame, but by resolve and self-respect. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her chin and fixed her gaze on Alexander. Stepping out from the shadows where she had cowered, her legs quivered at first but grew steadier with each stride. The murmurs in the crowd fell silent as hundreds of surprised eyes turned toward this small black woman advancing onto the stage. Her footsteps rang out like the triumphant drumbeats of a hero's march. Each step was more than just a move toward the piano. It was a bold challenge to every prejudice Alexander had stoked in the audience's minds. Sophia knew she wasn't just asserting her own worth. She was honoring her father's memory, and his lesson that dignity isn't defined by skin color or social class. On stage, Alexander's initial shock flickered across his face before hardening into a mocking smile. He'd never imagined she'd dare accept his challenge. To him, her approach was a last-ditch, desperate bid for fleeting glory. He was certain that within minutes she would fail and scurry back to her rightful place in the shadows. "Bravo," he sneered, slow clapping as she neared. "It looks like we're in for quite the entertaining performance." The audience, catching on to Alexander's derision, began to whisper and sneer again. But Sophia paid them no mind. She stood before the very piano she had only moments ago polished with care, her hand brushing reverently over its gleaming wood as though touching a dream she'd believed forever out of reach. In that instant, the opulence of the hall faded away, leaving only the steady thrum of her heartbeat and the sweet memory of her father's musical teachings. Facing Alexander, she met his icy blue eyes with calm determination and announced, "I will play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor." A wave of astonished whispers rippled through the audience. That piece was no casual choice. It was a formidable test even for seasoned pianists. Alexander's lips curled in scornful surprise before he burst into a mocking laugh. "Oh, how ambitious," he jeered, his eyes glittering with cruel anticipation. He was certain Sophia was about to make a spectacle of herself, a moment he would relish as proof of his superiority. But Sophia did not reply. She sat at the piano, drew a deep breath, and placed her calloused yet resolute hands on the keys. The crowd suddenly fell into tense silence, enthralled by the suspense of the moment. None dared laugh now, unsure what would unfold next. And as she struck the first chords, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Alexander, still wearing that sneer, felt an unexpected unease flicker across his soul, an unsettling awareness that something powerful and genuine was sweeping through the room, something his own performance had never evoked. In that instant, Alexander realized he might have made the greatest mistake of his life. Sophia's calm but resolute words rang out across the hushed, formal hall like an unexpected proclamation, silencing even the last whispers of the audience. Curious sneers transformed into astonished uncertainty and eager anticipation. Alexander, standing nearby, was equally stunned. His scornful grin vanished, replaced by a furrowed, uneasy expression. He had never imagined she would even know the name Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, let alone dare to play it. To Alexander, it was a complex, subtle masterpiece that demanded decades of rigorous training. How could a lowly black woman, mere minutes ago clutching a cleaning cloth, lay claim to such a work? Crossing his arms, he told himself it had to be a hoax, a fleeting impulse on Sophia's part. In a few moments, her foolish delusion would be exposed for all to see. But the instant Sophia's fingers gently touched the glossy black and white keys, a miracle unfolded. From the very first notes, the vast auditorium fell into stunned silence. It was nothing like the hesitant clumsiness Alexander had expected. Instead, the melody emerged powerful, precise, and hauntingly profound, as though a fresh, cool stream were flooding every corner of the opulent hall. Every note Sophia produced was flawless, brimming with genuine emotion deeper than anything they'd ever heard. Her sincerity shone through her delicate yet decisive hand movements, and the passion illuminating her face, previously hidden in shadows. The entire audience was drawn into the world of music she wove, a world of pain yet overflowing with hope, an authenticity they'd never felt during Alexander's performances. Alexander stood frozen, unable to believe what he was witnessing. He had always prided himself on his pianistic prowess, convinced he'd reached the pinnacle of artistry. Yet here, before all who once worshipped him, stood this petite black woman, whom he had publicly mocked, creating music that surpassed anything he'd ever achieved. Fear and rage welled up inside him as he realized that each note Sophia played was quietly shattering the very prejudices and false pride he had built his arrogance upon. In Alexander's eyes, smug pride had completely vanished, replaced by utter bewilderment. He took a step back, unable to meet Sophia's gaze. Her mastery felt like a mortal blow to his pride, stripping away the veneer of superiority he had long cloaked himself in. The audience, meanwhile, had utterly forgotten the famous artist who'd performed moments before. They were enraptured, spellbound by Sophia's extraordinary and unexpected talent. They now looked at her not with scorn or derision, but with deep respect and admiration. This was the moment that upended every preconceived notion and bias they had brought with them. For Sophia, lost in each note, eyes gently closed, nothing else mattered. Only the music remained, the very force that had saved her from past pain and was now restoring her self-worth. Every melody she played was more than proof of her value to the world. It was an emotional tribute to her late father, who had taught her to believe in her own inner strength and worth. The piano's voice swelled, bright, powerful, and moving, leaving an overwhelming hush upon every soul present. Tonight, not only Alexander Pierce, but the entire lavish hall faced an undeniable truth. True talent and the beauty of music can never be confined by skin color or social status. And the small woman once mocked as the joke of the crowd was now overturning every deep-rooted prejudice simply through the extraordinary power of the sound she created. The wondrous notes pouring from Sophia's fingers still echoed through the hall, sweeping away every doubt and sneer like a rising tide. Her music carried a raw, unvarnished truth, the anguish of years spent enduring scorn in silence, the fierce longing to step out of the shadows, and the quiet hope her father had infused into every melody. Those intense emotions seemed to strike straight for the heart of everyone present, awakening something deep within their souls. The audience felt themselves drawn into an entirely different realm, one where all boundaries of race, class, and status dissolved. Many couldn't hold back tears as they listened, even though they'd come curious and dismissive of this lowly black woman Alexander had made a public joke of. That contempt was giving way to awe and, above all, shame for the prejudices they'd once held. Alexander stood frozen, like a statue carved of stone, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. He'd never imagined this moment could come, never guessed that the woman he'd openly scorned and humiliated would possess such extraordinary, powerful talent. Those sublime sounds weren't just shattering his arrogance. They were tearing away the false veneer that had masked the deep biases in his own heart for so long. Every note Sophia played felt like an invisible accusation, gradually destroying the false beliefs Alexander had clung to, that true artistry belonged solely to people like him, and that someone like Sophia could never reach it. In that bitter realization, he began to understand how profoundly he'd been wrong, about her and about himself. Memories flooded back of every time he'd mocked and belittled people like Sophia. He'd always thought he was justified, that his position, reputation, and talent gave him that right. But now, each exquisite chord from the piano struck him like a blow he could not deny, forcing him to face an undeniable truth. Sophia's flawless performance had obliterated the very prejudices he had so carefully constructed around himself. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt genuine, deep shame. He had believed talent and social standing could excuse any behavior, that his biases were simply the way the world worked. Yet, with a few short minutes of courageous playing, Sophia had shown him those beliefs were utterly meaningless. The music continued to flow, stretching out these profound moments that no one in the hall wished to break. The audience had entirely forgotten Sophia's humble role. Now, they saw only an extraordinary, powerful woman of immense worth. A worth that no skin color or social rank could ever diminish. As for Alexander, he stood there, stung by the bitter truth that he had utterly failed to recognize another person's true value. As the piece drew to its close, an absolute silence settled over the hall. Sophia gently pressed the final key, letting the last note linger in the air, giving everyone a moment to reflect on what they'd just witnessed. Every face in the audience was marked by emotion and reverence. In that final silence, Alexander felt, more clearly than ever, that every prejudice he'd stubbornly clung to had crumbled, like a towering wall brought down by the sincere power of Sophia's music. He looked at her, and the arrogance and disdain that once defined his gaze were gone. In their place were astonishment, regret, and a deep respect he'd never before granted anyone. In that moment, Alexander realized it was not just Sophia whose life had been transformed. He, too, would never again be the same man who believed himself to stand at the pinnacle of art and society. As the final notes from Sophia's fingertips quietly faded into the air, the hall fell into an extraordinary silence, one both stunned and deeply moved, as if everyone were straining to hold on to the last echo of the miracle they'd just witnessed. Then, like a rising tide, the first thunderous applause broke out, building in strength and volume until the entire auditorium erupted in heartfelt ovation. Sophia opened her eyes and looked around, barely daring to believe what was happening. Before her, hundreds of audience members rose to their feet, their faces shining with admiration and respect. Tears streamed down many cheeks. No trace remained of the mockery or curiosity that had brought them here. This was more than a personal triumph. It was a profound victory of genuine worth over unfair prejudice. While Sophia was still overwhelmed by the applause, Alexander stood a few paces behind, unable to move. He felt frozen in place, his heart pounding heavily as a storm of complex, tormenting emotions surged within him. His once confident blue eyes were now marked by deep shame. Before him stood no longer the lowly attendant he'd despised, but an extraordinary artist who had laid bare his own terrible mistake. He had been wrong, spectacularly wrong, and he understood that his error extended far beyond underestimating Sophia's musical ability. His deeper mistake was the ingrained bias that had warped his view of human value. All the arrogant beliefs he'd built up were now shattered beyond repair. Alexander felt acutely the pain and injury he'd inflicted on Sophia. His cruel taunts echoed in his mind, becoming a shame he could not escape. Never before in his life had he felt such regret, genuine, wrenching regret that gripped his heart. Mustering every ounce of courage, Alexander slowly stepped toward Sophia, each footfall heavy with contrition. His former arrogance was gone, replaced by trembling sincerity. The audience sensed this change and fell silent once more, recognizing that this was a moment none of them wanted to miss. Sophia. Alexander's voice trembled as he spoke, fragile and choked with emotion. I was gravely mistaken. I not only underestimated your talent, but I denied your worth as a person. Please forgive me. His words made Sophia tremble with surprise. she met the gaze of the man who had so deeply hurt her, now standing before her, completely transformed. His pride was gone, replaced by earnest humility and regret. Alexander paused, gathering the right words to convey his sincere remorse. He drew a deep breath and continued, "And please, play on so we may hear more of this extraordinary music. I have never heard anything rendered with such truth." The hall held its breath at this moment of genuine apology and reconciliation, something none had expected this evening. Sophia looked at Alexander for a long moment, her eyes softening as she recognized the sincerity in his voice. She said nothing, only gave a gentle nod, quietly accepting his apology in a gesture rich with meaning. In that charged silence, Alexander stepped back, giving Sophia the stage entirely. He knew that from this moment on, his position would never be the same, but none of that mattered now. What mattered most was that he had finally understood the true value of another human being, a lesson that cost him his own pride. As Sophia placed her hands once more on the keys to begin a new piece, Alexander stood behind her, filled with profound respect and gratitude. For the first time in his life, he felt thankful to have witnessed and listened to such authentic music. Music born of the heart of the extraordinary woman he once dismissed, but who had now forever changed his life. As the first notes of the next piece rose from Sophia's hands, a powerful wave of emotion instantly swept through the hall. Alexander stepped back into the shadows, willingly relinquishing the spotlight to the petite woman he once sought to diminish, now dazzling everyone with her extraordinary gift. He stood silently in the darkness, overcome by a strange yet deeply genuine feeling, profound respect for the person he had scorned most of all. No one in the audience remembered Sophia's backstage role anymore. They were utterly captivated by her presence and by the honest, breathtaking music she was creating. Warm, sustained applause erupted, mingled with cheers and awed expressions. In their eyes, Sophia had become more than just a gifted pianist. She was a symbol of courage, resilience, and human dignity that transcended every social barrier. Sophia played with a renewed spirit. Each note was no longer a bid to prove her talent, but a heartfelt tribute to her father, who had first planted the seed of musical love in her heart. And though he was gone, there was no doubt he was smiling down on her now, proud to see the little girl he'd raised step boldly into the light and stand proud under the glow of Carnegie Hall. From his place behind the stage, Alexander witnessed her transformation with deep emotion. Jealousy and anger had melted away, replaced by a peaceful, meaningful admiration. Sophia had taught him his most valuable lesson, that true worth is defined not by skin color or background, but by the strength of one's character. Now, all he felt was genuine respect for the extraordinary woman before him. The applause continued without pause, as though it could never fully express their gratitude and reverence for Sophia. A few audience members even stepped forward to place vibrant bouquets on the stage, flowers offered not merely to a performer, but as a heartfelt acknowledgement of her courage and the dignity she had displayed. Amidst this unexpected tribute, Sophia caught Alexander's eye. In his once cold blue gaze, she saw unmistakable remorse. He bowed his head ever so slightly, offering a silent apology, and Sophia felt her heart heal a little. His sincere regret was proof that her music had not only moved the audience, it had reached and changed even the hardest hearts. The audience's praise for Sophia never waned. For them, tonight was not just a great concert but a powerful awakening to the deepest human values. Sophia, once hidden in the wings, had become a beacon of hope, of bravery in the face of prejudice and of unwavering self-worth. Finally, Sophia rose and took a deep, gracious bow. There was no fear or self-doubt in her eyes, only boundless pride, as she realized for the first time how truly valued and celebrated she was. When she lifted her head, the applause thundered again, an unending declaration that she fully deserved this honor. And in that moment, Sophia understood she had truly won, not only over Alexander, not only over the unjust biases she'd endured, but over her own doubts and fears. Now she was completely free, free to shine, free to forge her own path, and most importantly, free to become the strongest, most extraordinary version of herself that she had always dreamed of being. The concert ended, but its resonance lingered in the hearts of everyone who had been in that hall. As each person departed Carnegie Hall, they carried with them profound emotions and a completely transformed perspective on human worth and dignity. For Alexander, stepping off that grand stage marked the end of the man he once was. Confronted by Sophia's talent and courage, he realized just how deeply his own prejudices had misled him. In the days that followed, Alexander shut himself away in his luxurious apartment, the very symbol of his past pride and arrogance. Now its walls pressed in on him with thoughts of remorse and self-reproach, as he replayed in his mind the cruel words he had once flung at Sophia and others like her. Those mocking taunts now haunted him relentlessly, cutting into what remained of his dignity. Throughout his illustrious career, Alexander had never known such deep regret. Yet it was this remorse that spurred within him an urgent determination. He had to do something to atone for his past mistakes, to live up to the forgiveness and compassion Sophia had quietly extended to him. Not long after, Alexander re-emerged before the public, but not as a famed concert pianist. Instead, he announced the founding of a new charitable foundation. To the surprise of the press and public, he unveiled Music of Hope, an organization dedicated to discovering, supporting, and nurturing the musical gifts of Black artists who had been overlooked or hindered by societal bias. He explained candidly to journalists that this effort wasn't just his way of apologizing to Sophia, but his way of confronting his deepest flaws and uprooting the prejudices he had once fostered. At first, many doubted his sudden transformation. But as they witnessed his tireless work for the foundation, how he devoted himself to helping young talents overcome invisible barriers, they came to understand that Alexander's change was genuine and profound. Sophia's life, meanwhile, entered an entirely new chapter. Following that unforgettable evening, Carnegie Hall invited her to become one of their regular featured performers. This prestigious offer was more than just recognition of her extraordinary talent. It stood as a powerful testament to the triumph of her courage and belief in her own worth over the social biases she had once faced. Sophia quickly became an inspiration to millions. Her story, of stepping onto that stage despite fear and prejudice and proving her true value, ignited hope in countless people long forgotten by society. Letters poured in from across the nation, thanking her for rekindling a new sense of possibility and a renewed passion for life. In every later interview and recital, Sophia emphasized that her journey wasn't just for herself, but for her father and for all those left behind by prejudice. She used her own experience to remind people that talent knows no color or class, and that with enough courage, anyone can overcome even the most daunting barriers. One day, at the inaugural gala for the Music of Hope Foundation, Alexander invited Sophia back to the stage, this time with the deepest respect and gratitude. "Sophia," he said, his voice steady with emotion, "you didn't just change my life. You taught me the true meaning of music, of compassion, and of the courage to defy prejudice. I was wrong, and you gave me the chance to make things right and to do something meaningful for the world." The audience burst into heartfelt applause, tears glistening in their eyes as they looked to Sophia. She smiled softly, her gaze both tender and strong. In that moment, she understood that although Alexander had once hurt her, he had become living proof that anyone can change when touched by the truest values of life. And she no longer stood alone. Beside her stood millions who had found in her story the miraculous power of forgiveness, the bravery to stand tall, and the simple yet profound truth that every person deserves to be valued and celebrated. Time passed, and the wounds of the past gradually faded, making way for hope and profound change. 6 months after that emotionally charged concert at Carnegie Hall, the name Sophia Bennett was no longer tied to a meek, unknown woman hiding in the shadows. Now, she stood before thousands as a true concert pianist, an artist admired and adored by the entire music world. Sophia's first solo recital quickly became the most anticipated event of the year at Carnegie Hall. Tickets sold out within days, as everyone eagerly awaited the chance to see this extraordinary woman perform again, not as a surprise guest, but as a powerful testament to a talent that had overcome every prejudice to step into the spotlight. As the stage lights dimmed, Sophia walked on to thunderous applause. She wore a simple yet elegant evening gown, her eyes shining with pride and confidence. But the biggest surprise came when Alexander appeared behind her in a modest black suit, his expression humble and composed. This time, he was not the star under the spotlight. He had come to turn the pages of Sophia's sheet music. The audience was stunned. The man who once stood at the pinnacle of success and looked down on others now stood quietly beside Sophia, turning each page with respect and care. Just before Sophia's fingers touched the keys, Alexander bowed his head and whispered so softly that only she could hear, "Sophia, you've shown me what music truly is, and you've given me the chance to be a better person." Sophia smiled warmly and nodded, her eyes full of gratitude. In that moment, they both realized they were no longer strangers at odds, but allies united by empathy and reconciliation through their shared love of music. Sophia began to play, her notes flowing with passion and depth. This performance was more than a triumph over prejudice. It was the sound of forgiveness, compassion, and hope for a brighter future. Every listener in the hall felt the full range of emotion in her music. It was an honest, soul-stirring journey that reached straight into the heart. At her side, Alexander also felt the miraculous power of those melodies. His heart swelled with gratitude and humility as he recognized that he was no longer the self-satisfied man he once was. It was Sophia's compassion and extraordinary courage that had broken down the walls of arrogance and bias he'd carried for so many years. When the final chord faded, a profound silence enveloped the hall. Then it erupted into a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Tears glistened on faces throughout the audience as everyone realized they'd witnessed a historic night. A night when human dignity and talent were honored in their truest form, unbound by skin color or status. Sophia rose and bowed in boundless joy, then turned to Alexander, who still stood humbly by her side, and returned his grateful smile. In that instant, they both understood this was not only Sophia's victory, but Alexander's redemption, a deeply sincere act of atonement. Outside Carnegie Hall, thousands who had waited for hours cheered and chanted her name with genuine emotion. Sophia stepped out into their embrace, her heart overflowing with gratitude for those who had supported and believed in her. That night became a turning point not just in Sophia Bennett's life, but in Alexander Pierce's and millions of others. It was a night when music triumphed over prejudice, and human dignity was celebrated with power and authenticity. From then on, Sophia's story was about more than a talented artist stepping out of the shadows. It became a story of forgiveness, reconciliation, and the profound transformation of the human heart. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.